Russia, Ukraine, World War III, because Biden said, hey, you can use long-range missiles against Russia, and then Ukraine, they did, and then Putin comes out and sends the hypersonic missiles without any nuclear weapons in it, but if he did, what does that look like? How quickly does it go? And the argument is very weird, because both sides will say things like, well, you know, Russia didn't hold their end of their bargain when we, in 1991, the Budapest Agreement, when we gave them the 1,700 nuclear weapons that were left in Ukraine, we said we will give this back over to you as long as you no longer attack us and you give us security, and they didn't hold their end of their bargain. But then the other side is like, well, wait a minute, you also told us you're never going to join NATO, but now you are. But to fully understand this, we have to, one, see the people that say, no, Putin's the reason to blame. It's all his fault. We have to see their arguments. And no, NATO and Ukraine is the reason. And then we also got to look at the timeline of what the history looks like, what events took place, what different negotiations happened in the past. And then when you look at this, you're kind of like, whoa, I don't know if I agree with those guys. And I don't know about this. We're going to talk about all that stuff today. What they lost, what happened. You'll agree with some of the stuff you won't, but again, that's the whole purpose of this commentary. We'll even look at the map of how Russia grew the last 300-400 years since 1600s, and what they owned, what they lost, what happened, all of that stuff will go through it as well. But to go back through history, the most important thing to know is the fact that most of modern Ukraine was under Russia or Soviet control roughly 337 years, from 1667 to 1991, and approximately 90.76% of modern Ukraine history was under Russian or Soviet control. We're talking 91%, give or take. However, on December 1st, 1991, over 90% of Ukrainians voted for independence in a nationwide referendum reflecting widespread domestic support. And keep in mind, this is the time where Ronald Reagan, you hear the stories about the fact that, hey, Russia, look at you, everybody drives the same car, they live in the same apartment, there's no competition, nothing's taking place, here's what you need to be doing. And there was an NGO that Reagan was one of the founders, I think in 1983, called the National Endowment for Democracy, that was started in early 80s, and they're going on saying free speech, free market, civil society, rule of law. Gorbachev is watching saying maybe it's not a bad idea. And in 1990, Gorbachev accepted Germany's reunification and its continued membership in NATO under the explicit that NATO would not expand past Germany. NATO says, you don't have to worry about it, even to the point that U.S. Secretary of State Jim Baker, German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher made verbal assurances, I give you my word, verbal assurances to Mikhail Gorbachev in February of 1990. Baker was famously known for saying that NATO would move not 1 inch eastward, not 1 inch eastward beyond Germany. So imagine you're Russia, you're Gorbachev, we made a great deal. Hey guys, let's make this work. Totally fine. We're willing to accept capitalism. We're willing to accept some of the democracy, Western way of living. We'll take it, but let's make a deal. Yeah, listen, you ain't got to worry about it. We're going to be okay. This is what we're going to do. And then later on, it changed. Now, keep this in mind. When you're saying not 1 inch eastward, look at the map now. not 1 inch eastward of Germany. Look who now they expanded to. What do you think you're going to be thinking about if you're Russia? What's Russia's priority? Russia. So you just made a deal, and then you're looking at this map saying, hey, guys, what the hell are you doing? Well, what happened to Margaret Thatcher? Jim Baker? What happened to Kohl? What happened to the German chancellor? All these promises. What is this all about? Right? So this is where it's like, well, maybe these guys are not keeping their word. Now, let's go back again, 1991. The Chicken Kiev speech refers to an address by President Bush, George H.W. Bush, on August 1st, 91, said to Supreme Soviet Union of the Ukrainian SSR in Kiev. In the speech, Bush cautioned against suicidal nationalism. Hey, guys, Ukraine, it's a suicide. If you want to kind of talk about Ukrainian nationalism, you've been part of these guys for all these years, but this is a suicide mission you're on. You sure you want to do this? You don't want to do it. We want to do it. Are you positive? We want to do it. It's a suicide mission you're on. They're going to come after eventually. No, we're going to do it. That's the warning that Bush gave to them at that time. And I keep in mind, the timing of this is interesting because this is August 1st, 91. And then December 1st, 91, 3 months later, over 90% of Ukrainians voted. So think about the timing. He's saying, you may not want to do this, this whole nationalism, because in Ukraine at the time, they had the Azov battalion, which part of it they had built that was the Nazi symbol with the wolf sign. We've seen these before in documentaries. He's saying, guys, you're making a mistake. Do not do this. He's warning them. Shortly after that, we're talking exactly 19 days later on December 20th, Boris Yeltsin in 91 writes a letter after the dissolution of Soviet Union. He sent a letter to NATO suggesting that Russia was open to the idea of joining the alliance. Think about this. Russia is open to joining the alliance. Yeltsin framed the request as part of Russia's effort to foster closer relations with the West and to establish itself as a democratic nation. Now, the obvious question will be, what did NATO say? Well, NATO is not going to respond to them. They didn't. They're like, oh, okay, cool. That's nice of you to want to do this. But if we cannot do this, we built NATO specifically to go against you. If you now join us, now we're not needed. If we're not needed, what are we going to do with military-industrial complex? That's a big business model, making billions of dollars. Peace is not a good business model if you're selling weapons. Why would we want peace? Don't tell anybody this. Let's just kind of let this thing go. We know Yeltsin's trying to get some peace stuff going over here. No. NATO was shut down. Then what happens? A lot of people didn't want that. Now, keep in mind when 1991 was going on, that whole nuclear weapons that we talked about that Ukraine had leads to the Budapest Memorandum 1994, in which Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees from Russia, UK, and US. And at the time, when Ukraine declared independence of Soviet Union in 99, it inherited the world's third largest nuclear arsenal, 1,700 nuclear warheads for intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and strategic bombers. They gave it back. They just said, make sure you protect us. Again, this is the part where they go back and forth. Fast forward 2 years later, Ukraine writes their first post-Soviet constitution in 96 with the help of US. Then again in 2000, similar to what Yeltsin said, 9 years prior to that, Putin comes out and says, look, in an interview with BBC, they would consider joining NATO if it were treated as an equal partner. However, this was more of a rhetorical statement to gauge NATO's willingness to engage with Russia on equal terms rather than a formal proposal. Now, here's what's interesting. There's a clip of Tucker interviewing Putin where Putin explains, when Clinton was here right next door, I asked him, I said, hey, what do you think about the idea of us joining NATO? He said, that's an interesting idea. Let me talk to my team. Then they go and he talks to his team and they come back and says, no, not right now. Maybe later on. That's a conversation that took place between Clinton and Putin that he talked about on Tucker. So even though he may have been interested, NATO was not interested in having Russia join NATO. Why? It's a fair question for you to ask. Why wouldn't they want him to join NATO? Would it eliminate the idea of NATO? What would happen there? Again, moving along with the timeline. This is 2000. He's asking to join NATO. Then 9/11 happens, which is a year and a half later. When that takes place, Putin comes out publicly being one of the first leaders to give solidarity and willingness to cooperate with U.S. in combating terrorism. He was reportedly the first.
And I agree with him. As if you think about it, if there are no enemies, what's the purpose of NATO existing? Because according to my understanding, NATO is is an organization built to defend the countries that are part of it. Now, we all know that the major threat or the major competitors in the game are the USA and Russia. If those two become alliances, then there's no point of NATO. Not only that, let's keep in mind that during all of this, there are big companies that make a lot of money as a result of war. Please, guys, avoid the message. Don't pay attention to it. So, like I was saying, there are big companies who make a lot of money from these things. And these people, these politicians and the people who are CEOs of these companies are friends. So why would they want to do that? Because that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. If you think about it, war is actually a profitable, a profitable, I don't want to say event, but it's very, very profitable to these companies. They make a lot of money. Imagine the amount of weapons that they supply during war. They supply a lot of them, billions. They get a lot of money, billions of dollars from these wars. So if they get that amount of money, why would they want to encourage not to have any wars? Hmm? Why would they? It does not make any sense from that point of view. Because they say, listen, we're gonna lose a lot of money. We can't go a century without nothing. Hell no. We need something. We need something. That's why you always listen. Even though some of these wars are not big wars, because the recent ones they are big wars because they involve the big. Russia is a superpower. Israel is not a superpower, but is a he has a formidable military. But the other ones are nothing, nothing. And the worst part is that, like the way they cover this war, especially the ones that are happening now. For example, the one between Ukraine and Russia. Is like, okay, fine, they're making Russia to be the bad guy. But are they really the bad guys? Are they? Because if me and you have an agreement, then along the way after 10 years, you decide that you're going to abandon that agreement, then I have the right to react however I want to react. Now, me and you, we agreed that you're not going to join NATO, and I'm not going to attack you as long as you don't join NATO. Now, for some reason, you decided to write a petition or whatever it is that they call it to join NATO. And Putin said, "Are you sure you want to join NATO?" He said, "Yeah, I'm sure." I was like, "Okay, we'll see. We'll find out." And boy, did they find out. Boy, did they find out. The whole country in shambles. Just because you didn't want to abide by something that your forefathers, before you came in, agreed on, just so that they can keep peace. And this video actually shows why history is so important as well as understanding these wars and why they're taking place. Let's continue.
Leader to call President Bush on the day of attacks, expressing condolences and the support, emphasized that Russia understood the pain of terror, referencing Russia's own experiences with terrorist attacks, particularly in Chechnya. But Putin condemned the attacks as a barbaric act of terrorism against innocent people and offered Russian solidarity with the American people. Then 2 months later, November of 2001, he supports the U.S. in Afghanistan. Putin backed the U.S.-led military intervention in Afghanistan to dismantle al-Qaeda and Taliban. Russia provided crucial logistic assistance, including opening Russian airspace for U.S. and NATO flights. Think about that. Most people forgot that. That's 23 years ago. They're sitting there saying, hey, we know you guys are doing this. Whatever you need, we're here to help you. Think, America, Russia, whatever you need, we're helping you in NATO. We don't hear this story often when that took place, when they're helping Afghanistan, right? Facilitating the use of central. He described terrorism with Russia and the U.S. signaling a shared commitment to global counterterrorism. This is good. This is 23 years ago. So at this time, November 2001, America's like, oh, okay, he's helping us out. Afghanistan, this is cool. We're getting the support. To you guys, what's the story with this Iraq war? How much did Iraq cost us? How much money? Soviet states such as Ukraine, Georgia, heightened Putin's suspicion of Western intentions. Like, wait a minute, guys, what are we doing? I'll give you support, but don't think for a moment I'm naive. What are we doing here? I'm not with this, and I'm not with this. Don't blindly take my support that you can now do anything, and I'll back you up. And in NATO expansion, even more going into Eastern Europe, guys, at this point, we have a problem. You're not showing that you want peace here. You're showing that you want to paint me as an enemy, and how much more can I go sitting here wanting to make things good with you guys, but you guys keep pushing the envelope. Now, this leads to 2004, 2005 Orange Revolution. You may have seen this documentary before. I think Oliver Stone did a good documentary on this. Protests in Ukraine were sparked by widespread allegations of electoral fraud during the 2004 presidential election, where Viktor Yanukovych was initially declared the winner over Viktor Yushchenko, but twice this happened, 04 and 14. However, demonstrations, civil disobedience, civil resistance, strike actions, revolt ordered by the Supreme Court of Ukraine that Viktor Yushchenko declared winner. At the same time, who had their hands on this? A couple NGOs. One of them was the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED, and the other one was the Open Society Foundation, which you know who that's a part of, George Soros. It gets a little bit tricky here. Wait a minute, this guy wins, but you're not happy with him because this guy had no desire, Viktor Yanukovych, who had a decent relationship with Putin, had no desire to be part of NATO, and they're like, no, we don't want that. We want Ukraine to be part of NATO. Now imagine you're Putin. Wait a minute, all these promises, you want me to sit here? You just crossed the line. We now officially have a problem. That's why his motives are where they're at. Now, at the end of this 2008, 2012, Putin steps down. Dmitry Medvedev comes in because at the time they only had a two-term. Of course, later on it changes. But he steps down, and tens of thousands of people participated in the 2011, 2012 Russian protests, also known as a snow revolution. Protests took place across major cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, with chants like Russia without Putin, and United Russia is the party of crooks and thieves. Now, the Bolotnaya Square protests in Moscow were among the largest since the 1990s. Now, here's where it gets tricky. So these guys are protesting to not be for Putin, right? And in America, NGOs can pay people to protest. We don't have a law against that. It happens all the time. And it's a regular thing. Open Society's been behind it. Putin says, wait a minute, you guys want to pay these guys? This is allegedly, and some people can verify this, you guys are getting paid to protest against me, so you make me look like an idiot in Russia? No problem. I'm going to come back in and I'm going to make sure anybody that's taking money from any NGO, whether it's the National Endowment for Democracy or it's a USA, the United States Agency for International Development, anybody that's taking money from NGO, you have to declare it to everybody. You can't just go out there and take the money and fool the average Russian voter, not realizing what's really going on. By the way, you may or may not agree with whatever Putin's doing. Are you for NGOs paying people to be actors going outside, making a lot of ruckus, confusing the American people, and the media comes and says, oh, look, they're all against the president. They're all against the president. Look at all this stuff. Do you want to?
I mean, this also shows like the influence that these big countries have on other countries, elections. Like they have a lot of influence, and the fact that they have a power to, because it's sort of like overthrowing a whole government. It's the same thing to me. Just because you're not doing it violently doesn't mean you're just doing it by using NGOs to make sure that people strike and they make sure that a certain person is not elected so that they can push your agenda. That's still illegal in my eyes. And listen, I know the United States is what is it? Is a global peacemaker. But we know what they did in Iraq, right? We know how they destabilized the Middle East as a result of false information, which, according to also the reports that I've read, they knew, some of the people, some of the officials, they knew, but they decided to go with a lie because they had their own intentions. They knew why they were doing what they were doing. So I'll be the global peacemaker as long as you follow and you listen to me. But as soon as you start doing your own thing, You're gonna fuck around and find out. You're gonna find out exactly who's in charge. Isn't it that the definition of tyranny? Because I think that's the definition. If you don't listen to me, I will enforce myself. I will make you listen to me. I'm not saying Russia is innocent, but all I'm saying is that Russia, USA, all of them are the same thing. The difference is that the other one is blatant. Russia is very, very blatant with how they conduct themselves. They destroyed Georgia. Look at the war with Ukraine. But with the United States, when they were at war with Iraq, you didn't see this much coverage. Because they have, the biggest, media outlets, and they control the narrative of what's been said. Oh, we are defending yourself. Really? You are defending yourself? From what? From what exactly? From what? Which, listen, we can also go back to the 9/11, event thing. But are things that, the way they seem? Or is there something else going on? Because if you think about all these things, then you can see it is something is not adding. The math is not mathy. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. Let's continue with the video.
Because it happens in America all the time. He sits there and says, I'm not with the guys. You're not doing that. I think I need to come back. Now imagine during this time, 2008, 2012, Putin's watching everything that's going on around the world. You have a lot of time, right? It's like, wait a minute, what's going on over here? What's going on over there? What is all this stuff? He's done, right? Assuming he's done. And he sees the global uprisings, Arab Springs, 2010, 2011. Well, what happened to Middle East leaders like Ben Ali from Tunisia, Mubarak from Egypt, or Gaddafi, Libya? Even in the documentary Putin's Revenge, Julia Loeb, who is part of that documentary, says that Putin is said to have been deeply affected by the way Muammar Gaddafi was killed. He watched a video of a bloodied Gaddafi dragged from his bunker, sodomized and shot over and over and over. Think about it. He's watching. It's like, wait a minute. What are they doing to a guy like this over and over? And he thinks he is doing everything to avoid a similar fate. He's doing the opposite. This is the report that's being given by Julia. He's watching all this stuff taking place. When he got killed, Gaddafi, it was October 20th, 2011. So this is the 4-year span that he's not running Russia. And he's saying, this is kind of weird. They went after Saleh from Yemen. Then he saw the color revolutions with what happened with Georgia. He's saying all these post-revolution, orange revolution, then overthrows, all these things that's going on, this is influencing him to sit there and say, wait a minute, the fear of Western influence, saw these moments as U.S.-led effort to destabilize authoritarian regimes. He knows what he is. It's not like he's debating it. He knows what he is himself. Domestic parallels with Russian protests shared traits with these uprisings that is being paid by NGOs. All of this influences him to say, like, look, whether he wanted to come back all along or not, nobody knows, only he knows that. But all of this says, hey, no, listen, Dmitry, you're a good guy, but I think you're maybe a little bit of a pushover. This is Russia. I'm going to come back and defend this is my place. There's no way I'm going to let this happen to Russia. I'm coming back to clean house. And that influenced him to come back. Now, right after Gaddafi dies, October 20th, 2011, month and a half later, December 4th, 2011, Putin wins. When he wins, he's going to come back and be the president. Hillary Clinton gets out there and says the following. In that time, says, as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton criticized Russia's parliamentary elections, calling them neither free nor fair, which reportedly angered Putin. So he comes back and there's a few things he does immediately. Just number one, he cracked down on dissent, restricted NGOs, used anti-Western rhetoric to undermine opposition. Putin blamed protests on foreign interference, particularly from U.S., and accused Western-funded NGOs of inciting unrest. A law passed in 2012 requiring NGOs receiving foreign funding to register as foreign agents. Think about it. You're getting money from an NGO. You have to come out and say, hey guys, I'm a foreign agent. If you didn't, You're breaking the law. Something very weird that you need to know about. February of 2008, the current CIA director under Biden, William J. Burns, at the time was a U.S. ambassador to Russia, authored a confidential cable titled Niet means Niet, Russia's NATO enlargement red lines. In this document, the current CIA director, former ambassador to Russia, he conveyed Russia's strong opposition to NATO's eastward expansion, particularly regarding Ukraine and Georgia. He highlighted that Russia's officials viewed such enlargement as a potential military threat and a violation of their security interests. Burns warned that pursuing NATO membership for Ukraine could lead to an internal divisions, violence, or even civil war, potentially compelling Russia to intervene. This is February of 08. Right now we're what? November of 2024. 16 years ago, current CIA director, former ambassador of Russia, saying, guys, what are we doing? What are we doing? 16 years ago, this guy knew what was going to take place. And he's given a warning to U.S. They're like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And by the way, you know who was president in 08? Obama. 1 month after inauguration, saying, don't mess with these guys. It could backfire on us. Boom. Now, many will say we're on the brink of World War III. If one of those hypersonic weapons, their missiles they're sending has a nuclear bomb in it, guess what happens then? Game changer, right? Now, you remember in 2004, that whole protesting that took place when the two victors were running, Yushchenko, who wanted Ukraine to be part of NATO, and the other victor, which was Viktor Yanukovych, who was like, no, we don't need to be part of NATO. I will have a better relationship with Putin. Guess what? Yushchenko becomes president from 05 to 2010 for Ukraine. This is the third president of Ukraine. Then the other victor, who's kind of like, nah, I have no interest in being part of Ukraine. He then becomes president. 2010 to 2014, he now is the president. However, protesting in Ukraine gets so bad in November of 2013 after Yanukovych refused to sign an EU association agreement favoring closer ties with Russia. Many Ukrainians, especially in the west and center of the country, supported EU integration as a pathway to economic forum, democratic governance, and escaping Russia's influence. Anger at Yanukovych's perceived corruption and authoritarianism drove public discontent. It was so nasty that he had to leave, and he was no longer safe being in Ukraine. I believe he escaped to Russia, if I'm not mistaken. So if you keep in mind, while this is taking place, the West is saying, oh no, this is all organic. It's what these people want. They want this. They want to join NATO. They want a better relationship with EU. They don't want to have anything to do with Russia. Putin saying, no, these people are not real. They're getting paid. And so the lady from the Frontline documentary done, Putin's Revenge, she went on the streets asking the people in Ukraine who were protesting, hey, did somebody pay you? And you know what many of them said? Yes, we were paid. She has nothing to do with this. She's Frontline, PBS, doing a documentary, Putin's Revenge. No, a lot of these guys were paid by NGOs to go out there and make it seem like they wanted the other guy. This is your part where you get to pick and choose and believe who you want to believe. Some say, no wonder this happened. U.S. and NGOs are being involved to make sure there's a fall because they don't want more peace there, because they want a guy that wants to join NATO because we need a bigger enemy to keep going after them. This is business for us, right? Again, this is all allegedly. You get to pick and choose which argument you want to believe. So now the next 8 years, you know what happens? It's the back and forth of Russia against NATO and each finding ways to piss the other one off. And this happens for 8 years. NATO expands its presence in Eastern Europe, which is Poland, Estonia, Latvia. Military exercises. NATO's doing these large-scale military exercises, such as Defender Europe or Trident Juncture. At the same time, Russia's responding and doing its own military exercises. The Zapad exercises, showing them the fact that, hey, we're ready for simulating large-scale conflict with NATO forces. Then there's allegations of cyber attacks from Russia to NATO members, such as Ukraine and others, like the NotPetya attack of 2017, and then disinformation campaigns from both sides. Meanwhile, Ukraine growing NATO aspirations, declared NATO membership as a strategic goal in 2019. Again, can you imagine? It's like, wait a minute, what are you guys doing here, right? Enshrining it in its constitution, NATO provided increased financial and military assistance to Ukraine. Russia viewed NATO's growing relationship with Ukraine as a direct threat to its security, citing NATO's 2008 Bucharest summit declaration that Ukraine and Georgia would eventually join the alliance. This keeps going back and forth, and it's getting more and more heated. Again, this leads to 2021, the military buildup near Ukraine. Russia amassed over 100,000 troops near Ukraine border in late 2021, citing security concerns, opposing NATO's continued expansion. NATO and Western leaders accused Russia of preparing for an invasion. Then this comes to December of 2021. Russia makes its demands that a guarantee Ukraine would never join NATO and removal of NATO military infrastructure from Eastern Europe. NATO rejects those demands, affirming Ukraine's right to determine its alliance. They're now backtracking on their promises that they had. And a couple months after that request, guess what happens? War. war. So at the end of the day, the question becomes motive. What is NATO's motive? What is US's motive? What is Ukraine's motive? What is Putin's motive? Everybody's motive, right? They can tell us whatever they want that we see all over TV and news and all these experts that are speaking, but you and I have to study history for ourselves, for yourself. Say, yeah, I don't know, what is their motive? Because motive for Russia could be, if you look at this map from 1500s of what happened to Russia from then, where Fedor was there, then Boris and all these guys, all the way up, you see how much territory they got. And when you think about Ukraine was under Russian or Soviet control for 337 years, from 1667 to 1991. All right, so Russia's motive is to say what? Ukraine is really ours. What are you guys talking about? This is none of your business. This is our property. What are you doing? And then NATO's point may be, well, Yeltsin was easy to negotiate with. He was a bit of a pushover, nice guy. He was like a globalist. Maybe we could have worked with him and done some of the stuff that we wanted to do. Dmitry was kind of easier. This guy, Putin, is a true believer, and we got to get rid of this guy because he's in the way. Because if NATO and US really wanted peace, why don't you allow him to join NATO? And if you do, you put certain guidelines in place. Yes, we want to entertain you being part of NATO, but we need you to do boom, 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 boom. Why don't you do that? Why isn't that conversation taking place? Why? Is it because the people that are given the money are tied to maybe some of these military industrial complex companies that are like, wait a minute, guys, we need a little bit of war? Are they trying to push Russia to get strong with BRICS? Is that a good thing for the world? I don't know. But the most important thing we have to study is motive. Last night, my dad and I are sitting there. We're talking about different countries that have been destroyed because of war. And he says, how do they rebuild these countries? How do they do it? I said, major banks come in, like a Chase, like a BlackRock. Hey, $400 billion, we'll rebuild your country at such and such. And if the country doesn't pay the money back, what do you think is the collateral? Your natural resources. The banks are going to get their money. Like imagine if you say, hey, I need $500,000. You go to Joey, I'll give you $500,000. Based on what? Back it up based on $1 million equity you have in your property. If you don't return $500,000 to me within a year, I own your land. Collateral, right? So these big banks are going to come in and say, oh, let's rebuild Ukraine, $400 billion. What if we can't pay back? Don't worry, we're going to get your natural resources. You got plenty. Hey, we got to get this Putin knocked out of the way. Why? Because the number one country in the world with natural resources is not us. It's Russia. $75 trillion. And there's a man in the way. You know what his name is? Putin. That guy's got to get out the way so we can go in Russia and do business. It's a lot of money. The more you and I know motives, the more we can understand why every one of these guys are presenting their argument the way they are. And then you will be responsible on whose motives you believe and whose motives you don't. But at the end of the day, history will tell us whose position was right and whose wasn't. Sometimes we have to wait a year or two and sometimes decades to find out if you were right or others were right. That takes a while until we find that out. If you got value out of this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to find out more about the history of NATO,
So yeah, guys, I'm sure you can see that I'm a bit sleepy. It's actually past 12 right now, a.m. So I'm a bit tired. But yeah, from this is we can actually see that looking at the history of this conflict, you have people who are instigating this. They don't want to fight directly, but they're encouraging. I have a strong belief that the US knew how Russia would react. But they encouraged Ukraine to try to, join NATO. Even before Putin decided to attack Ukraine, he said, listen, this is not what we agreed on. You need to remove their weapons, and you need to go back to your promise that you're not going to join NATO. You're not going to join NATO. Then everything will be okay. And NATO said, nope. No, the safety of people of Ukraine. Listen, we don't care about that. All we care about is, our own interests. Their own interests led to thousands of Ukrainians getting killed, and a lot of them being displaced, and a whole country in shambles. The whole country is destroyed. And the other important thing that Patrick Davis touched on was someone is going to have to rebuild Ukraine. Who's that person? He gave a list of companies. I can most guarantee that these companies are American companies. If you don't pay back, we're going to own it. So guess what? By indirectly, you're actually putting yourself in a position where you can say in the future, listen, I own this now. So technically, since this land is mine, I can put NATO here. And I don't think during negotiations with Trump and Putin, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they should just go back to the agreement that they originally had and stick to that. But I don't know. We'll see. We just have to wait and see how this how this whole thing plays out. Because I'm actually interested to see how Donald Trump handles this and how is he gonna end the war. But I have faith in him. I think he'll do good. So yeah, this is the end of the video, guys. I hope you liked the video. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below